Hello, my name is Evan Weinmeister. This is a presentation for HSC 300. It is a public health report on anthrax for Dr. Nam's class. So just a few topics I will be covering will be the introduction, the transmission, the disease in both animals and humans, prevention and control, a few current cases, and some prevention tips as well. So let's get started. So what is anthrax? Well, the organism is Bacillus anthritis. It's a large gram-positive spore-forming bacteria. I have some pictures there. Basically, the spore is what is really going to affect you and get you sick. It thrives well in oxygen and poor nutrient conditions. I kind of compare it to a fire, where a fire needs oxygen and not the best conditions to keep burning. And anthrax, the spore, has some similar qualities. The lethal doses of the spore are anywhere from 2,500 all the way up to 55,000, and they can survive for literally decades. There are a few cases that it can actually survive like hundreds of years in the soil. Now I have to warn you guys. There are a few pictures of actual anthrax, and so if it's too gross for anyone, go ahead and skip ahead or close your eyes and we'll be all good. But yeah, throughout the presentation there are a few pictures that are, quote, gross. So the first one, this is the spore that it's obviously infected, and it's obviously pretty bad, and it's on an infant, on his or her, I'm not quite sure. I think it was a she. I think it was a little baby girl. It's on her right arm. So let's just talk about human transmission for a little bit. If you come in contact with infected tissues, wool, hide, soil, you're more likely to get it. Also, one other transmission is some biting flies. Flies that will eat at either the soil or dead animals, and then they bite you. That's another way to get it. Inhalation, if you're tanning hides or dealing with bone or wool or anything, if you inhale the spore, that's another very common way to get it. And then gastrointestinal is if you eat undercooked infected meat. Here are just some of the other places you can get them for human transmission, anywhere from wool sorteries, laboratory workers that are working with wool or dead animals, slaughterhouses, obviously, if there's an infected animal. Onto animal transmission. The bacteria is present, and it can sustain in it can extrude from any orifice. I should say. It extrudes and it grows when it is exposed to air and contaminated water. It will help grow, and it will help the spore in the organism to grow, as well as, like I was saying earlier, the insect bites, where that can be carried from place to place. So the next slide is again one of the, quote, gross slides. Here's just some anthrax, for some of the spores that we can see out from day 2 to day 10. If you see this, you probably should go to the doctor and have it looked at. So gastrointestinal anthrax, the incubation period is 2 to 5 days. And it happens most often when you eat contaminated meat. So if you don't cook your meat properly, or if you get it from a cow or a goat who has anthrax, and like I said, you haven't prepared it or cooked it well enough. The case fatality rate here is 25 to 75%. Inhalation anthrax, the incubation period is 1 to 7 days. The first phase, the initial phase, the first one, you're going to just see a mild fever, whereas the second phase, it starts to get super severe very fast. And death is in 24 to 36 hours, and the case fatality rate untreated is 75 to 90%. Next is just some treatments I want to talk about. Penicillin is it's the most natural, and it sustains, it's the most natural strains, and it helps the most. It is obviously the easiest to get. This other drug it's not as easy, but it was the treatment of choice in 2001. I'm going to try to pronounce it. It's a ciprofloxacin, I believe. I think that's what it is. And no strains of the disease are actually known to be resistant. So this drug was the #1 choice in 2001 just because, it was the one that killed all of them. And the course treatment was about 2 months, 60 days. Prevention and control. We can protect ourselves by preventing the disease in animals with trade restrictions and just making sure that our animals are not eating off soil that is contaminated. We also have to improve industry standards, and for laboratories where we're either dissecting or dealing with meat or just researching, we have to make sure that there's safety regulations and sanitation, especially in the laboratories. Now, the vaccination here, I should have prefaced this with not everyone here is at risk. So your at-risk groups are mostly the veterinarians that are going to work with the animals, lab workers who work with animals, livestock handlers, obviously, and then military personnel. Now, why military is because they tend to go out into farms, or they tend to be stationed, in rural areas where this disease, this spore, might have been in the soil for a long time. Remember, it can gestate for 100 plus years. So military personnel are also some at-risk groups. There is a vaccination, the immunization series. It's 5 injections over an 18-week period, and there is an annual booster. So you and me, it's just, going down the 91 to Disneyland every day. You might not, I do. We don't need this vaccination. But if you work on a farm with large livestock like cattle, bull, things like goats, even of that nature, that is when you might want to consider, or if you're in the military, that's when you might want to consider looking at getting this vaccination. Prevention and control. If you see anything, or you're feeling bad, or you have, or you see, I don't. There's probably not signs that say, hey, this is anthrax, but you definitely want to report to the authorities. Quarantine the areas. If you see a dead animal on an area that you think might have anthrax, or if you just see a dead animal in general, it's just a good, word of thumb. Do not open the carcass, because when you open that, the spores will actually release into the air and either be airborne then or fall back to the soil, and that is how they get into the soil and gestate for the 100 years that we were talking about. Minimize contact with whatever you are touching, that the dead animal or the whatever. That is definitely a big one. And then also you have to make sure you wear your PPE if you are designated to work with infected animals or meat, bones, textiles, anything of that nature. Another prevention and control. So the local regulations around the world determine how you dispose of infected carcasses. There's either incineration or deep burial. Now, incineration is the more favored one, because it will kill the spore. I think it was like a 75 to 80% chance that it will kill the spore. Whereas just a deep burial, that spore, now it's in the soil. You're literally helping, put the spore in the soil. So that's not always the best choice, but I know that some local regulations, there are laws that say you cannot burn carcasses, and so this is just the next best thing that they could do. After you do a deep burial, though, you do have to decontaminate the soil as best you can. You also want to isolate sick animals, discourage human scavengers. I know scavengers in the animal kingdom, it's hard because if a wolf wants to eat a dead cow, that's its misfortune if it contracts anything. But if we see a dead cow, we probably don't want to. Oh, there's meat I can do, and I can get, and yeah, and of course the vaccination. So your at-risk groups, once again, they're veterinarians, lab workers, livestock handlers, and military personnel. Just a little bit more of the vaccination, just a little more information for the military personnel is right there. And just one point I wanted to point out, it did begin, the earliest was in 1997 by the Clinton administration. He was the one that said, hey, we should probably help with this. My last thing is just some prevention tips for everyone. Vaccinate everyone. If you believe you are an at-risk group, make sure you vaccinate. It's a huge it's a big thing if you get anthrax, and it can be very deadly. Work in well-ventilated areas. If you're in a small space, try not to be in a small space, but if you have to be, make sure it is very well ventilated. Have fans, have hood fans that are going to be pumping out the spore, so you're not inhaling it directly. Always use your PPE, your gloves, mask, whatever you need to be safe. An obvious is wash your hands and keep your workspace clean. That is the number one way to help prevent the spread of anthrax. And that is my presentation. Thank you guys so much for listening to me and watching my presentation. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I hope that you learned something valuable about anthrax.